This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at the DMOunion.com or the digmeoutunion.com. One of those two websites will get you there. You can also go to digmeoutpodcast.com and wind your way through our labyrinth of clicks and bleeps and loops.
Did you say the? There's no the in there.
Well, like I was emphasizing, like the Ohio State University.
Don't emphasize.
I put the emphasis in the wrong place. Okay, it's just dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Considering the album we're talking about, I make sure I gotta get this right, because we're talking about one of the most, when you look at their streaming numbers, one of the most popular albums released in the 1990s. To give you perspective.
Wait. Whoa.
Yes.
From where? Based on Spotify?
If you go to Spotify, this album collectively probably has over 200 million streams. Now I'm blowing your mind, Jay. I'm blowing your mind.
You're blowing my mound too.
Your mound. The mound on top of your shoulders, which is your head, and contains your mind.
Hey, I know I have a big head. You don't have to call it a mound.
It's like Mount Rushmore up there, but all four of them in one. Anyway,
you have to explain this. I don't understand.
I will, and I'm gonna do it by introducing the record. It was suggested by Jim Stelter. He has suggested many records over the year. Last year it was Bedhead. The year before that, in 2021, he suggested the Wellwater Conspiracy. Back in 2020, it was Firewater's The Ponzi Scheme. And I think that's it. I think those four. So this is his fifth pick, and it is the 1998 album Stratosphere by the band Duster. Now, Jay, I mentioned that this album on Spotify has well over 200 million streams. Specifically, if you go to the song, which one is it? It's the song Inside Out, has 163 million streams, 163.7 million. The rest of the record, only one song has less than 1 million streams. Every other song has multiple millions of streams. And I'm going to explain why. But let me ask you.
I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Had you ever heard this album or of this band?
No, I'm already on to is one of the guys in the band like a computer genius? And
so one of the guys in the band is a guy you might have heard of. His name is Barack Obama. And before he was, no, I'm just kidding.
I was going to go more the angle, like he figured out how to get false plays.
Nope.
Can wind up 1,000 computers somewhere in a data farm, and he's got them all streaming this record.
So let me give you the information here. Let's start with the history.
History of the band.
They're from San Jose, California. They formed in 1996. Multi-instrumentalists Clay Parton, Kanan Dove Amber, and Jason Albertini. That's been most of the band. And then Albertini left the band in 2022, just last year. And they put out their debut record in 98, which is this one, Stratosphere. They did put out some cassettes and a 7-inch, but this is the first full length. And then they put out an EP the following year called 1975. And then in 2000, they released the album Contemporary Movements. Now, that was kind of it. They kind of just went off and did different things after that. The band didn't do anything. And then in 2018, they, on their Instagram page, they said they're doing some recording. And they would be releasing a box set called Capsule Losing Contact through the Numero Group, which is a reissue label that's done a ton of reissues for different artists. And that was released in 2019.
Everything so far is very typical.
It is very typical. Then they released a self-titled album on December 13th, 2019. He said so the lead singer not lead singer, because I think there's different singers. But Clay Parton said, "We took a break for almost 2 decades. We didn't think it was going to completely stop. We thought we would keep it drifting, at least, maybe at a slower pace with a different process, but everything just went dark. We were always in touch, and sometimes we talk about doing duster things, but the days just piled up." So they weren't together. However, they put out that album in 2019, the self-titled, and then they released together their 4th album in March last year. So you're asking yourself, Tim, why does this have 160 million, 200 million streams?
Did one of them date Taylor Swift?
No. So this is a very organic.
I'm grasping at anything here.
All right. This is a very organic thing that happened. Basically, a bunch of young artists in the 2000s who listened to similar bands all sort of arrived at this band at different times, and it became like this underground thing that people passed around in the indie underground slowcore circuit. And because their records were hard to find, it became, this thing where like the record started out, they were a couple bucks. Now they're $100. Now they're like $500. People are like going crazy. They can't find this band. They can't find this album. So it almost had like I want to say like a Neutral Milk Hotel type deal. Like they put out a record and then just disappear. They didn't exactly disappear, but you know what I mean? Like there was this indie rock record that all of a sudden years later connected with a lot of people. So a lot of bands that I don't know, but if you read a 2018 Stereogum article called "The Low-Key Legacy of Duster, Your Favorite Indie Band's Favorite Indie Band," it kind of gives you a really good explanation of why this band became big in the underground. It never really, broke through to the mainstream. But like everybody who's creating indie bands in the 2000s heard this band and were influenced by them. All the slowcore artists, all the indie rock artists, space rock, a lot of bands such as, which I don't know any of these bands, but bands like Click, Wild Pink, Howdy, Ovlove, Us Only, Pair. These are all like indie bands that have toured for years in the underground circuit that we're not a part of anymore because we're old and we're out of the loop. And they have been playing this record. Like one of the bands uses one of their songs as an opener for their set. Like that kind of stuff. And they've been featured in a number of like, podcasts and articles, like when they want to mentioned on Stereogum. If you go to their rate your music page, they have thousands of reviews. Like most bands have a couple hundred, maybe dozens. This band has a massive amount of reviews. Now what's funny is the latest one was today. When I looked, and it was a negative review. It was like a half a star review out of 5. So it was somebody who had been obviously heard of this hype and then came away unimpressed.
Yeah, it feels like there's a missing piece still. Somewhere somebody's hyping this to cause this to happen. I mean, there's so many bands that could fall into the story that you've explained so far that would still be hard to get to that many streams. Like, couldn't you insert like a band like American Football into that story?
Sure, you could, and absolutely. They don't even come
anywhere close to that many.
I think social media has played a part. From what I understand, like the song gets played on, how you can put music on Instagram posts and TikTok posts and things like that in the background. A
Yeah.
lot of people use like these instrumental pieces that are on this record.
That's what I was wondering, if like some of these songs are getting
I think
got
so.
placed in some viral TikTok videos or something.
And
Huh.
there's no logical reason. This is just an oddball. So it's sort of like
Like, give me some context of like when you say that many streams, what other bands are near them?
160 million.
Yeah, like where, what, who's in that category?
If we're talking about, let's say Nirvana, that's one of the biggest bands we've talked about, right?
Yeah.
So like in comparison, Smells Like Teen Spirit has 1.7 billion streams.
Okay.
So this would be like a low end second or third single Nirvana single. Like All Apologies has 192 million streams. They have 2 songs over 1 billion streams on Spotify. Come As You Are is also over 1 billion. Yeah, it's up there. It doesn't make sense. I agree with you that a band this obscure, look at the Pixies. Let's take a listen to the Pixies. What are the, you would think like, oh, the Pixies,
right.
they must have a fart load of streams. Yeah, Where Is My Mind, which was in Fight Club and in numerous other things, has 757 million streams. The next closest is Here Comes Your Man with 191. So there you go. I mean, so if you're asking for a logical reason, I don't have one other than this has been.
I want to believe
around.
this story because this is like.
No, I would
in some ways it's tragic
in
that it takes this long, but like you would like to think that this is possible. You would like it to happen like over the course of maybe 5 years and not 30, but.
And there's other bands like American Pleasure Club, Girl Pool, some of the other ones that were mentioned. Again, I don't know any of these bands because I'm out of the loop, but these are bands that are Ricky Eat Acid. Is it another one? And what else was there? Tividad, Harmony Tividad. Oh no, that's the person who's in Girl Pool. Excuse me. Sorry, Harmony. So no, I don't have good understanding of this other than it seems to have been organic.
Yeah.
I hope they made some money. I hope they made a few grand.
I don't know. Yeah.
Because between this and then I got to assume like other streaming services, they probably have some streams, maybe on YouTube as well. Hopefully on the social medias, they get a little couple pennies from each of those.
I believe it probably hinges on like how they're distributed, what the label situation is.
Well, they own it because they were on Up Records and that doesn't exist anymore because the guy who ran Up died in like 2000. So shortly after they put out the second record, he had passed away. So I think they have their own like Bandcamp page with the record on it. So I think they're doing
that puts them in a good position. I meant more for the streaming. Because when you get half a penny per stream, if you're dividing that down between like record labels, distributors, and all the other entities between you and the stream, you're getting even less of that. So
Jim said when he suggested this record, let's see, he said they have a long-standing cult following after going dormant in 2001. They reformed in 2018, which we talked about, and put out new albums and started selling out shows. This is the 25th anniversary of Stratosphere. He said it has more of a feeling and atmosphere than the standard verse, chorus, verse rock song, though there are some of those tucked in there. Let the distorted melodies comfort you while spinning ever so gently into orbit. Over at Patreon, we'll share the poll results at the end of the show, but here's what some of the comments were from our Patreon supporters. Gavin said, I'd never heard of this band, and the name had me thinking middle of the row rock band like Candlebox or Grunt Truck. I very quickly developed a love-hate relationship with it, as I really didn't like the intro style song at the beginning, but then I warmed to its laid-back ambient style and had it on for a while. But it never really went anywhere from there, so I'm left at an EP of any 5 songs except the first. Interesting choice, though. Wendy Beeler. It's not like this is an album full of singles or anything. Each song sounds an awful like all the others, but this really brings atmosphere and sets a mood. It's not like most of the music I listened to, but it worked. Where the album? Ian McIver. It's like someone put a My Bloody Valentine LP on at a slower speed on the turntable. Not that it's a bad thing, like my comment would indicate. While I enjoyed some songs, there are few lulls that made me tune out. There's a bit of fat that can be trimmed, but there is a short, worthy album underneath it all. However, not enough of one to warrant further investigation of discography at present time. Jeff Gentis. Per a very recent episode of podcast named Redacted, these dudes are enjoying some bizarre resurgence, or bizarre surgence, not even a resurgence, among the youth, and their Spotify numbers are ridiculous. So this was a very timely pick. I only had time for a couple listens, but it sure sounds promising. And then Patrick Testa said, this is a cool album. I absolutely loved the short first track and wish there was more on this record. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, so maybe there is. Well, I hope you got to listen to the whole thing there, Mr. Testa. Speaking of the album cover, like Gavin did, when I saw this, I thought, okay, this is either like a very minimalist, ambient, Brian Eno-esque album, or this is like Death Cab for Cutie. Like this reminds me of like an early Death Cab for Cutie record cover with that, like you're muted, by the way, with that lowercase sans serif sans serif font.
Yeah.
It has the look of something very specific, and I think it did actually meet that. What are your opinions on the album cover?
I agree. You know, it's abstract, so you're going to get something that's a little on the artier side. The color palette, it reminds me of maybe something like you're going to get something emotional, maybe Midwestern. So I guess it was a little bit of a surpriser from, you said California?
Yeah, San Jose.
Yeah.
Home of Sleep and Smash Mouth.
That's quite a spectrum there.
There you go. You got Sleep, Smash Mouth, and
they're both very colorful.
When there's a San Jose music festival and they have all the hometown bands play, you get to see Sleep, Smash Mouth, and Duster in a row. Let's get into the record. I do want to mention that All Music, I really don't like this trend, but All Music originally gave this album 3 stars and then re-reviewed it and gave it 5 stars.
Please stop All Music.
If
you're going to do that, then don't.
A Rolling
you can't
Stone.
Just have like you got to do like an average, right? If you're going to keep having different people review it over the years, then you need to have like an average of all those reviews.
That's why I think, I know it has its flaws, but Metacritic, when it comes to music, is pretty useful that way,
right? Because
you're getting an aggregate of all the reviews as opposed to one apparently malleable review. But Jay, this is the first time, I mean, we've never really reviewed an album that's in the zeitgeist of the American indie music. We could see record number of downloads of this podcast.
We're gonna maybe make a lot of people upset.
We've talked about slowcore bands before. Like Jim brought us Bedhead last year. We've talked about bands like Antenna and Ida and Low. I think that I actually said to Katie, my wife, that I was like, oh, this band's kind of like Low, and she was like, give me a Low song, and I was like, I can't give you a Low song. I don't know any. I just know like what they sound like. But if you asked me for a Low song, I wouldn't be able
all the ones we've reviewed. I thought are pretty obscure in the grand scheme of things, but like you just handed me a whole other list that's below them in terms of level of notoriety. So
it's weird because Low was like on major labels in the 90s.
This is like third level, like the
Right.
band that influenced the band that influenced the band that influenced Low.
Yes.
Maybe.
Now this record was produced by Phil Eck, who worked with Built to Spill on some records. He's also worked with Band of Horses, Fleet Foxes, Modest Mouse, The Shins, Mudhoney. So, Pacific Northwest bands, basically. He doesn't want to leave home. He's not interested in traveling. That's okay, Phil. We appreciate and your work. So let's get into it, Ray. Jay, I almost called you Ray. I don't know why that happened.
Okay, Ram.
Jay, tell me one thing you liked about Stratosphere by Duster.
Or would you prefer to be Kim?
Yim.
Dim?
Yes, Yimothy.
Timothy?
Go ahead.
Well, there's a charm here. I think there's there's a warmth to it. I think there's an intimacy to it that works pretty well. It's built around these methodical tempos. I wouldn't say they're slow all the time.
No.
I was a little surprised to hear it described as slowcore because it's not always slow. But it is methodical. There's like this interesting, like it's almost like a metronome, but then they push and pull with it a bit here and there. So it's not like Heading for the Door, Queen of Hearts. There is some organic feel going on there where they start to then mess with you a little bit where, I think it's Heading for the Door, that second verse, it kind of dramatically slows down, or like you hear the whole band kind of shift. Queen of Hearts just has this push and pull throughout it where everything's very locked up and methodical, but it's also like, I'm not sure it's set to a metronome, so you can kind of feel it moving. There's a lot of interplay between what I'm hearing is like two guitars and a bass that sometimes sounds like a guitar, which means more picking than chords. There are some chords on here, but I think the parts that are most interesting to me are more when they're picking out notes and creating this kind of bed of two guitar parts and one is kind of chiming through. I also like when they use the synth pad underneath. I think that really gives it, kind of elevates a lot of the guitar work. I guess the production is lo-fi, sometimes more dramatic than others. It varies how dramatically lo-fi it is, which is a bit of a head scratcher that we'll get to later, but there's certainly some songs on here that sound like they came right off a 4-track. I think another thing that makes it distinctive is some of the chord changes and choices there. I found myself like, thinking I knew where it was going to go, and then they would throw in a little change that was nice and unexpected. I think in general music, or at least rock music, that's, something we're always looking for is like, you want some predictability, but then you want some surprises. And I think they do that in their own unique way. And, I think it just works as an instrumental record, honestly. It kind of creates this environment where at times you feel like you're in the bedroom, sort of with this band rehearsing. And then other times you feel like you're kind of sucked into the 4-track machine with headphones on and hearing all the tape hiss and everything. So I think it's pretty successful, and that's kind of where the charm comes from. I think working within fairly simple palette, using some effects from like maybe a keyboard and guitar effects and some like simple like distortions and things, keeping everything in this intimate feel, warm. Nothing's very bright or ringing. It sort of all has this like all the highs are kind of trimmed off. It's a little bit soft overall sonically too, which I think adds to the uniqueness of it. So that's some of the stuff that worked for me. What worked for you?
Well, as a fan of sort of noisy, ambient, experimental music, I found a lot of this record interesting. I'll start with a song like Stratosphere, which reminded me a lot of William Basinski's Disintegration Loops albums, which were 4 albums he put out between 2002 and 2003, and they're like one song per album. And he ran a tape loop and recorded it as the tape was disintegrating. So that you hear this loop of like noise, and then it's getting cracklier and cracklier and breaking down. So that's what you have on like some of these songs. You have like a song like Stratosphere, where it's noisy and it feels like the song is like falling apart as you're moving through it, which I like. I like that atmosphere it's providing on Stratosphere. And then in comparison, a song like Earth Moon Transit, which I think when you mentioned this not being entirely slowcore, that's what I was thinking of. Like that song has a very shoegaze, early 90s feel, early Ride or My Bloody Valentine or something like that, where it's just a wash and distortion and noise. And that's where the record actually works best for me, when it gets a little gnarly and loud and uncompromising of worrying about quiet and stuff like that. It's just kind of going off in these loud, noisy directions. And I did like I disagree with Gavin. I did like the opening track, because I think I tended more just towards the weirder instrumental stuff, because having done this podcast now for 12 years and having listened to a lot of slowcore and whatnot, it's not as novel anymore as it was when we started getting into, because I'd never listened to any really slowcore music whatsoever. I was aware of bands like Galaxy 500 and Low and these this underground scene that existed. But now we've gone through like probably 7, 8, 9 of those records on the podcast, a lot of them in the last couple of years. And so in comparison to that, some of these songs work really well. Like you mentioned Queen of Hearts. I also liked some of the instrumental stuff, like Docking. I like when it's a band instrumental that sounds like a band just like jamming, like on Docking the Pod. That one works for me. Gold Dust, another band instrumental. it works better for me than the stuff with the vocals, just because the vocal isn't present. I mean, it's very buried on a lot of these songs, so it almost becomes like just another noise in a lot of respects. So I think that's when it works better, as opposed to me being actually hear what he's singing, because then I'm like paying attention to what he's doing, as opposed to sort of letting the music wash over me in this, wall of, not really a wall, it's more like a half wall of noise. It's not quite the total wall of noise. So that's some of the stuff that worked for me. I'm still confounded that Inside Out is the song that has 163 million streams.
Right.
Because, I mean, I don't know that there's anything to that song. Like, I don't get what's going on that would make require someone to listen to it that many times.
I couldn't even make out what the lyrics were about. I mean, it's like a little bit of poetry, I guess, but I don't even know what he's talking about. So,
well, to me, it's not even
like, maybe there's a message in these lyrics that's incredibly insightful or something. And
right.
I didn't find it.
I mean, there's 17 songs on this record, and I wouldn't put that song in the top 10.
Right.
So I'm confused as to why that is the way it is. What did not work for you on this record?
You hit on it. The vocal to me is it's just not compelling. I don't know why it's necessary other than delivering lyrics.
Right.
But even then, it's delivered in such a weak afterthought. It's just like, melodically, it's just doing what the guitar does most of the time. It's mixed low most of the time. There's one track where it actually mixed loud, which is odd. Like, they flip the mix. There's a track about halfway through the record where they go from the band being sort of mixed wide and the vocal in the middle buried. They flip it and the vocal is mixed wide and the band's mixed in the middle buried, which was an odd choice. So there's one instance where the vocals definitely pop, but overall, there's nothing from like a tone delivery standpoint that's compelling. Melodically, it's not compelling or doing anything different than the guitar. I found myself just paying attention to the instrumental stuff. Even the songs that were instrumental, I didn't miss the vocal. One of the songs, I think it's Queen of Hearts, the vocal comes in at the end. Is it? Or maybe but when it comes in, it just mimics what the guitar was doing. It's like, oh, it's Earth Moon Transit, which has this cool guitar lead that's kind of the hook of the song that draws you, starts the song off, and it reprises throughout. And then when they get to the outro, that lead is, then they add a vocal on top of it that's just singing the same melody as the guitar part. And I'm like, what is that? Well, why are we doing this? Like, why is that necessary? That's one of the things I struggled. I don't understand the production of the record. This going between, and you'd let me know if you were hearing it the same way. I mean, there's just this mishmash of, like, some songs are super lo-fi and some songs are medium lo-fi, and then some songs sound like clean and normal. And I don't get what is determining what songs sound lo-fi and which ones don't. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with the style of the song, or so I'm left with some of these songs that are lo-fi and instrumentals. They come off to me as demos, like, oh, this just sounds like a band rehearsing and somebody hit the record on the tape player. Like, it doesn't present as a song on a record.
Yeah.
And part of that is the song, but part of it is also the production choice. It's like, if you give me a song that sounds full and like, like a studio recording, and then you flip to another song that is similar in sort of writing style, but then sounds like it was recorded on a 4-track, like my brain starts interpreting that as like, oh, this is just a demo. So I don't quite get what they were thinking there.
It reminds me of some of the mid 90s Guided by Voices records in that sense, where you would get a song or two that sounded actually pretty well recorded, not on a 4-track or a boombox, and then you would get ones that were just covered in tape hiss, and it wouldn't be the whole record, but it would just be from track to track. You wouldn't know like what you're gonna get. And I agree with you, because like a song like Topical Solution actually is a very clean production on that song.
Yeah.
It's a very nice sounding song. The lyrics are completely incomprehensible. You just kind of hear somebody singing, but you can't, it's impossible to make out what they're actually saying. But I agree with you, like the song it sounds really good. And then you go to Docking the Pod next, and it has a much fuzzier lo-fi quality to it that's not as pleasant to listen to as a song like Topical Solution.
I guess I would have rather, because to me, it takes me out of the headspace of what they're trying to, what kind of world are you trying to take me into here?
Right.
Am I in the bedroom with you while you rehearse? Am I listening to the 4-track that you recorded things on? Am I in a like bright, practice space with you? Am I in a theater? Like, where am I listening to this record? And it's incoherent that way. Like, it's just this roller coaster ride and changing for no obvious reason that way, which just brings me out of the record, right? I just, as I'm getting compelled and sucked into it, then I'm out again, because I'm like, well, this is different. What's going on now? So it's just sonically a little incoherent to me.
Right.
I think any of these styles would be fine. I don't mind the lo-fi sound on the record. I would just prefer, like, just make the whole record like that, or make it in the middle, or make it clean. Like, just pick one.
It's the equivalent of when you're listening to a song, and then all of a sudden on the next song, the drums are panned hard, and you're like, wait a minute, why'd you just pan the drums hard to the left or to the right? And the bass is on the other side, and now we're going back to standard on the next song. Like, no, you can't do that. It completely changes the listening approach when you are listening for that style of a mix. And I agree with you, like, this is all over the place, which I can understand if you are looking for music that is as far away from the mainstream as possible, that this would click for you, because not only is it a style of music that is very, I'm not going to say unpopular, but just it's not accepted by the masses as, music that is typically listened to. but you're just throwing a lot of curveballs within this sound that even though I'm primed for it, I'm still struggling with a lot of the record because of that. Because it's so like there's aspects of this too that is kind of space rock, and there's I think space in the lyrics here and there, and they're definitely in like the
song
so
titles,
if you were like, okay, we're gonna make a slow core space rock album that's gonna be real trippy and stuff, I'm like, oh, I'm all for that. I want to, because you think about a louder band that's a space rock band like Failure, they have some incredibly slow songs and spacey atmospheric songs. They're incredibly well produced because of Ken Andrews.
Yeah.
But point being, you can do that sound, that slow sound, at any fidelity and make it sound good, but it's just got to be like a consistency there. Yeah. And I think we're looking at this, as reviewers, obviously. I can understand someone who's in a band and they're 19 years old and they're just trying to find something that like to connect with that isn't mainstream, that they might hear this, and this might be the equivalent of listening to the first Pavement record or, something way outside the mainstream for the time. Or imagine discovering this 10, 15 years after it came out. And you go on the internet and there's no reviews for this record except for one review in Pitchfork. You know what I mean? Like nobody's been talking about this record. And you go, oh, this is my little thing now. I guess that would be an appeal. Sure.
The last thing I want to mention, I'm wondering if you thought too, it's easy. I don't mean this as like a offhand kind of comment, but it is very similar to the point where I was being Constellations and the Queen of Hearts, and my brain going back and forth between those songs could not tell the difference. I was like, this sounds like the same song in a different key. Like, and I don't mean that like that's like a common criticism you hear, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, this album all sounds the same. I mean, like literally, like I'm going note by note between between the two songs. And I'm like, wait, it's like that sounds like exactly the same thing played. Now the production, it's one of those Constellations lo-fi and Queen of Hearts is higher fidelity. Man, they're very similar. Did you find that a challenge on this record?
There were very few points where I thought this is original. Yeah. Where I heard a riff or a progression and thought, I've never heard that before. That's cool. Yeah. So when you mention like those songs or like the picking that's happening on Topical Solution, I go, I feel like I've heard these before. Like they don't sound all that terribly new. Like, so Docking the Pod, that one had like a weird minor-ish riff that I was like, oh, okay, this is weird. This is different. I'm digging this. The wah wah and what would be the chorus too is a little different. Yeah. So there's throwing some things here, but like you can only, pick an A minor chord at 60 beats per minute so many times in so many songs where it just kind of sounds like this. You've heard this before. Now, some of that stuff might have come after, and now I'm just, comparing it to something that existed before. Like the William Basinski albums came out after this. So they clearly weren't like listening to William Basinski and going, okay, we want to make a song that sounds like him, because it didn't happen yet. It just so happens that it sounds like what was happening. I'm sure there were other people playing with manipulating tape and creating, ambient experimental music like that. So some of that, those guitar progressions and what have you, they might have started here and people stole from them. I don't know, but they aren't as, they're not as original as I would have liked. I could hear the progressions and I go, okay, I know what the chords are. Yeah. You're touching on something
I had in my notes too, where this is where something like counter melodies can be so important, because you can take, a chord progression you've heard before. Maybe there's a couple little changes that are different. But once you put a counter melody on top of it, or some kind of conflicting or complementing melody, now it becomes much more complex and unique, either with a vocal or another guitar part or keyboard or even the bass line. The bass can do that sometimes really effectively. They don't really do that on this record. Pretty much everybody's playing the same thing. I mean, there's some lead parts here and there, but from a chord melody standpoint, it's all following the same, like, go back to that kind of methodical, like, feel. And I'm wondering if that also contributes to what you're saying, where it's like, well, I feel like I've heard this before because it's so simple, I guess, in that way. It doesn't have the layering or the counter melodies that I'm thinking of, or some other element to make it absolutely unique. Like, can't be confused with somebody else.
So I feel like if I were talking to someone who was a champion of this record and said, you know what, I just feel like it's missing some counter melodies, I feel like they would scoff at that as if that's making it too much.
Right.
They're going for the simplicity minimal. Is what works well for them. It's funny. I do like a little bit of complexity with music. I don't need everything to be Rush, but I feel like this album has less notes than the average Mars Volta song. Like, even the song to song, there's a lot of the same territory, a lot of the same keys. It feels like the same area on the guitar, where they're playing. It doesn't feel like there's not a lot of variation even in the limited amount of what they're doing. And that was a little frustrating from a sonic standpoint, because on one hand, it's a good record to put on because you can just sort of like drift away and not pay attention to it, and it all kind of melds together and you don't really miss anything. But also, it's hard to find any docking station for the pod, so to speak, and go, okay, this is the song right here. This is the song you got to hear.
Right.
I feel like you basically, if you press play and hit random, you could land up on any song and be like, yep, that's on this record. I sort of remember it, but couldn't tell you if it's at the beginning or the end, or if they're singing on it or not. Maybe there is and I just can't hear it. Maybe there isn't. Who knows? So that's where I'm at, and that's where you're at.
Where we're at.
It's a fascinating story, though, because, like I said, this album was basically ignored when it came out, barely got any reviews, and then 25 years later, we're talking about it, and it's got 200 million streams on Spotify.
Right.
Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Even at what you said, like, we're not talking, this isn't somebody who had some sort of moment in the spotlight where they ended up on The Voice or something, Right. This is because a bunch of indie underground bands championed them on like message boards and person to person. And
who knew indie underground bands had any power at all?
Yeah, I thought indie rock was dead.
I thought it was like the least powerful force in the world.
Apparently the indie rock mafia has got more pull than we understand. So, but
well, I mean, in that way, it's a good story, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we want more stories like this, and it'd be nice if like some of these streams could get distributed to some other bands too. But we'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. Give Low a chance. I looked. I don't think Low's entire catalog has 161 million streams. So maybe check out some Low. Check out some Antenna, which we enjoyed. Check out some Bedhead. I'd say even check out like Sparkle Horse. Or you know what I mean? I think that's one of the things, and we'll get into our final rating here. You know, Mark Linkous had such personality, even though he was very droll with a lot of his stuff, but there was such unique arrangements and sounds. And I feel like people who like this, who maybe haven't heard that band, should check out Sparkle Horse, because it might blow you away.
Sure.
So let's give our final ratings, Jay. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I'm gonna go with an EP. Heading for the Door, Gold Dust, The Queen of Hearts. I'll throw Inside Out on there. I mean, I'll buy the hype. Read to Hillsborough, and Earth Moon Transit would be my EP. I don't know that including much more gets me anywhere beyond like understanding who this band is, hearing them at their best. I think a handful of songs like that do the job pretty well. Where'd you land?
Well, I have a couple of the same, but I'm basically an EP as well. I really like the instrumental stuff, so I'm going with basically all the instrumental songs as a nice little EP I can put on when I want to nap, just loop it. I'm going with Moon Age, Gold Dust, Docking the Pod, Echo Bravo, The Queen of Hearts, Stratosphere, and Earth Moon Transit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 17 songs make it onto my EP. Now, if you wanted to take those singing songs and put them on their own album of 10 tracks, maybe add a counter melody here and there, then maybe you got a different record. But for me, it's an EP. Like you, it's an EP. Our patrons didn't agree. They went 75% worthy album, 25% better EP.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't think the comments were going to be leading us that way.
I thought it might be 50-50 based on what, Whitney and Patrick said. But 75-25. That's a nice result. So even though, we have our opinions and our patrons have their opinions, we don't always align. And like, we don't align with a lot of people on a lot of things.
We're just two dudes. We like what we like. We try to explain it, but
right. You try to.
It's nice to have the sort of a broader voice of other folks to chime in too and balance us out.
What I'm saying is, if any of the super fans of Duster show up and are angered, please do not try to cancel us. We're just, a couple of old guys listening to old music. That's it. But we need to thank Jim Stelter for bringing this record to us, his 5th album that he has brought to us over the last 5 years. Greatly appreciate you being part of the union.
Yes. Thank you, Jim.
If you out there would like to be like Jim, you can join us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. We might not have agreed with you on this record, but there are over 600 other album reviews that we might align. So don't just take this one and think we're a couple of idiots that don't know what they're talking about. We might agree with you on 20 other records and might be 20-1. So who's the idiot now?
I don't know who. Wait.
Maybe there's no idiot in this situation.
Is that rhetorical?
Maybe we were all the idiots all along. Maybe the idiots are the friends we made along the way.
It sounds like you're writing a Roger Waters song.
I heard that he was giving a concert and he interrupted it to do an hour-long reading from his book. I don't think that's a good idea. Is it called
Who's the Idiot Now?
Yeah, I basically what are you doing? Roger, I know you're very full of yourself and you have a big ego, but man, if you're in the middle of a rock concert and then you sit down and start reading your own book, like you better break out like Harry Potter or something if you want to keep people entertained. They're seeing you. You don't need to read from their book, the book that you wrote.
Imagine, like, you've been to concerts recently, you know what they cost.
Yeah.
Imagine paying that ticket price and then having to sit through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine sitting in the Sphere watching U2 in Las Vegas and Bono sits down with a copy of the Bono.
It's autobiography.
He's like, hey, let me tell you about young Paul Hewson.
They turn the screen off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put the house
It's
lights
just
on.
one spotlight on him.
Yeah.
It was a cold day in Ireland. No, break out The Martian or something. Read something entertaining. Give me a live reading of The Martian. Give some Andy Weir some love. If you would like to join the union, where we have in insane tangent-driven conversations like this over at our Discord, you can be a part of. You can join us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. It's where you get to vote on polls like this one, vote in our monthly Tournament of Death, albums suggested through digmeoutpodcast.com. They enter into the tournament, like 18 at a time, 2 rounds of 9, and then 4 go to the final, unless there's a tie. Sometimes it's 5. And then we vote, or the patrons vote, and we review the record that they have picked from these suggestions. It's also at Patreon, where you can read the box newsletter, which you can sign up for at digmeoutpodcast.com as well. The box newsletter, our Substack newsletter, comes out every weekend with a release calendar of new music, books, movies, etc. for 80s, 90s, and aughts artists and bands, plus 2 1-minute reviews of new releases. Just recently, I reviewed the new records from these closely aligned bands, Wilco and Hurricane.
Love
Hurricane
it.
featuring the 2 brothers of guys who had brothers in Quiet Riot.
Right.
And Wilco, of course, the less successful half of Uncle Tupelo. Kidding. I love Jay, but I wish he had not made some of the records he made in the 2000s. He went like full on like honky tonk on a record. And,
oh, really?
yeah.
Which one?
It's called Honky Tonk.
Really?
No, it's okay. It's just like,
yeah,
there's some clunkers. I mean, Wilco has some clunkers too, but their clunkers are at least weird.
Right.
So, but I love them both. I don't. Let's just move on. I don't want to say anything that might impact my relationship with Jeff or Jay.
Right.
I don't need to Thurman Thomas this situation.
Right.
So the box newsletter, sign up for it. And then lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. Regardless of your feelings about this specific episode on Duster, you can have general feelings overall for how much you enjoy the podcast. I don't know why I'm so worried. It's probably not going to do anything. We're probably not going to get any sort of bump we're not going to get any Duster bump. This won't be like Van Halen. Like the Van Halen episode far and away is like the most listened to episode of this podcast. Probably helped us garner at least like 1/10 of our million downloads. So
I don't know, man. Maybe
we'll see.
In the next 30 years will be our biggest episode.
Do we get paid for downloads when people do? No, we don't.
We don't. we make even less than Spotify.
I was going to say musicians are screwed, and we're not even smart enough to get screwed. Wait, I would like to be screwed too. Nope, not for you, podcaster. Go start a Patreon.
Yeah.
Okay. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.